Good afternoon, everybody. We're delighted to have you and everybody who's here. Let me just reiterate once again that the only videos you'll see are the people on the screen, and there's a Q&A question function at the bottom of the screen. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. Please ask your questions as we go. So I'm Mark Blattner. I'm the CEO of the Jewish Federation, and you are in for a treat today as we have two tremendous community rabbis who are going to talk to us about what is the role of clergy to guide a community during uncharted spiritual times. So let me introduce our two panelists. First, I want to introduce Rabbi Is Posen, who is the associate rabbi at Congregation Neve Shalom, originally from Detroit, Michigan. She also received her ordination from the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies, and she is the current chair of the Oregon Board of Rabbis. And then I want to introduce Rabbi Ariel Stone, who is from my hometown of Orlando, Florida. We share that together. Interesting to have two people from Orlando here in Portland, where Rabbi Stone is a graduate of the Hebrew Union College. And she's almost been 30 years as a rabbi. I think mazel tov to you. I guess next year will be your 30th anniversary, so mazel tov to you. But one of the most interesting things is that she was the first American rabbi to lead a congregation in the former Soviet Union in Kiev in the Ukraine. Rabbi Stone has also served twice as the chair of the Oregon Board of Rabbis. So we're grateful to have both of you today. So let me turn it over to you, Rabbi Posen, and then we'll have Rabbi Stone make some opening comments, and then we'll get into a give and take. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark, for that introduction, and to everyone here. It's so wonderful to be here with you and to have this opportunity. I feel like I want to start with a word of Torah because that's what rabbis do. And I think about the fact that we are just a day away from the end of counting the Omer and entering into the holiday of Shavuot. And I love the holiday of Shavuot and counting the Omer, so the 7 weeks between the beginning of Passover and when we reach this moment, because it gives meaning to time and asks us to be fully aware of the time that we're in. And we don't do that. I mean, we may do that, okay, the 3 weeks in the summer if you're an observant Jew, or the 7 weeks between Tisha B'Av and the beginning of the high holidays. And then you might have some awareness of high holiday time, but it's not a commandment to be as aware of space and time as it is right now. And as somebody who always loves counting days or knowing where I'm at, I have found a heightened awareness of the number of days. So the Omer, Passover began 47 days ago. And so we know where we are now. And as a mother with two small children at home, we've been doing daily gratitude. So I can look on my wall and look at the columns and say, okay, we are in week 11 of being home. And I think that the Torah that's in that is that Shavuot, it's the weeks. When we mark our weeks, when we're aware of the passing of time, we're intensely also aware of the world around us and the way that we interact with other human beings. And I really believe that in this crazy world that we're living in, that awareness is incredibly essential to creating community and being able to move forward together in building community. And Shavuot was a pilgrimage festival. So you counted these weeks and then you got to be together again. So they were together at Pesach and together at Shavuot. And here we are having had 7 weeks where we still haven't been able to gather in the ways that we might have wanted to. And so the Torah that we received this year at Shavuot is the Torah of understanding what it means to be present with one another in ways that may not feel comfortable or may not feel like the way we're used to it, but knowing that we're still doing it and we're still here. And I use that as also the lead in to the response to the question of what's the role of clergy to help guide us in these uncharted spiritual times, because I don't have to look far to know what our job is as clergy. It's to be there. It's to mark time in the ways that our tradition has given us to do. If you look at Shavuot, which starts tomorrow night, the original intent of Shavuot was a harvest festival and only became this Torah celebration after people no longer could go to the temple? Right there is the answer. We are a resilient people. We know how to adapt and change based on the situations that we're in. And that resilience allows us to hold faith and hold each other in knowing that we've been here before. We likely will be here again, but we will still be here as a people, as a community, as a religion, whatever you want to identify with is what Judaism means to you. We're still here. And so I think the role of clergy in this time is to be present, just like it always is, maybe a little bit more acutely so. But we're here to be in partnership with each other. Tomorrow night, the OBR is doing a beautiful tikkun together, because now is not the time for division. It's the time for unity and to stand together and to teach with each other and to lift each other up. It's to be present with anyone in our community who has needs, whether those are financial or physical or spiritual or emotional. We're here as clergy, and our response is the same as it always has been, which is our doors are never closed. We are always doing the work of rabbis and of rabbiing, whether we can physically be present, which would be, I think, easier and probably more fulfilling for so many of us. It doesn't matter. We're still here. And I think that's the space that I'm holding at this point, is being present. And the role of clergy is to do what we've always done: hold fears, hold anxiety, teach Torah, and remind us that we are resilient and we can come back from whatever is thrown at us.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Posen. Rabbi Stone?
Yes, thank you. I want to echo Rabbi Posen's appreciation for this opportunity. It's lovely to have a chance to talk about the things that matter most in our community. When I saw the question, what is the role of clergy to guide a community during uncharted spiritual times? My first response was, but they're not uncharted. And I want to pick up on an aspect of what Rabbi Posen said, which is, we've been here before, and if history is any guide, we'll be here again in different ways. In a time and a place where so much of what we normally expect our lives to be like has been taken from us, it's interesting to consider, what is the real structure that gives our lives meaning? What can't be taken from us? And to stay with the question, to me, a rabbi, and I can't speak to clergy in general, I think it's more of a catch-all term, but to me, I look at what a rabbi is. And according to Jewish tradition, rabbis, the word rabbi, which we often translate teacher, actually means a lot. Meaning, a rabbi is somebody who knows a lot. So in the Talmud, that's a rabbi is somebody who has a lot of Torah to teach, or who has a lot of halacha that they can bring to bear in order to help people figure out the best choice for their lives. Rabbis derive our meaning from Torah learning, Torah grounding, Torah sharing, Torah teaching. And it strikes me as so interesting, especially with Shavuot coming up, because it's given me also a chance to think a little bit about, what is this thing that we accept every year, that we say we're accepting almost, much more often than that, actually, because of the way our liturgy is created. But what is Torah? And what you realize is that the Jewish people, as secular as many of us have become, all derive our sense of norms from Torah. So our sense of what is justice, what is social justice, our sense of what is God, love it or hate it. Elie Wiesel said, you can be a Jew without God, with God or against God, but never really without God. The sense we have of what the world should look like, the sense we have of what holiness is. These are things that are specifically grounded in Torah, and then we take them in all the directions we take them as a people whose culture is really mediated by this narrative of where we come from. Because there are many ways to answer the question, where am I from? This is how Jews answer it. And as a result, this is the perspective we bring to the world, not only for ourselves, but in how we see the world that we want to build together as a community. A rabbi's role is to guard that and share it. It's to be, as people have said, not a sage on the stage, but a guide at the side. It's one of my favorite lines from the last 20 or 30 years. Rabbis are not priests, and we were not developed as pastors either. All of those roles are secondary, and they've been imposed on the American rabbinate because Jews looked around and saw what pastors and priests were doing and sort of assumed that our people needed some of the same stuff. Rabbis are fundamentally meant to offer the guidance and the structural framework for Jewish life, that it might have in it meaning, purpose, direction. And I feel that that's where our primary strength needs to be. We occupy a role in the same way that every other organization in the Jewish community occupies a role. And I find that we are all strongest when none of us has too much mission creep, but that we can say, you know, if we have a functioning, I'll take one of the Oregon Board of Rabbis' perennial concerns, and we're so thrilled that the Jewish Family and Child Service seems to be gaining some strength right now, because for years, we don't want to do social welfare. We want to say there's another arm of our community that we share the general welfare of our community with. We are strong when everybody is strong doing the role that they're uniquely able to do and trained to do. So for me, rabbis are here to help us maintain the sense of what is Jewish about this. What is Jewish about this community? How can we maintain that sense of the ultimate meaning? So for example, just to take a quick example in these days, as I said, when everything that you thought you lived your life by is taken away, you've got the Omer count. You've got, hello, Shabbat as a precedent for not doing and finding meaning in that. Lots more to say about all of that. Lots more that's very interesting about the Jewish in our Jewish community, and so much about my function that I love because of moments like this.
All right, thank you for that. So I'm going to start with some questions in a different way, and everybody please use the Q&A function on the bottom of the screen. Rabbi Posen, you mentioned, you know, our job as a rabbi is to be present and to be there. And Rabbi Stone, you talked about the strength of rabbis. So my question is, who's there for you? Okay, like, you know, you're there for everybody, but who's there for you to help you through these? You know, your women, your moms, sisters, daughters, cousins, whatever you are. You have other parts to your life too. So who gives you that nourishment and support? So I'm just curious.
So I instituted at the beginning of this that every Board of Rabbis meeting begins with a check-in for how we're actually doing. And so we had an emergency Board of Rabbis meeting right after Purim, right after everyone shut down. That was basically over an hour of each of us sharing where we're at and offering support for each other. And we've kept that as our tradition. So we are, I think, in large part there for each other. And we've been starting to embrace that space more. It's for me, that's how we start each meeting now. It's not good and welfare at the end. It's a check-in before we do anything else. How are you? And how can we support each other? So I think that's one major way that we're there for each other. I have no embarrassment about sharing that I have a great therapist. And I think it's super important to share that message that we clergy are there for each other, and medical professionals, especially mental health professionals, are really important in our lives right now, no matter where you are. And that, again, is super important. And the last, other than I have individual meetings with other rabbis just to sort of catch up and share the space. I have a personal trainer who's there for me, who you may go to your stylist, your hair cutter, whatever, and tell them whatever's going on in your life. My personal trainer, Fit Life, Alexa Hassman, is the one who's keeping me sane through this whole thing. So those are the ways that I'm finding nourishment. And I think each of us can probably find nourishment and support in that sense as well.
Rabbi Stone, who do you go?
To that, I would add that one of the things that's been really important to me in my rabbinate, and I'm very grateful to my congregation for the human beings in it who seem to get this, is that rabbis are also human beings. I am privileged to work with a group of people who say to me regularly, you don't need to be at this meeting, or, make sure you take that day off. And as a result, it's been easy for me to keep my life balanced, even at times like this, because the pattern was already there. All right. So I know that in the society in which we live, we all, as Jewish professionals, are supposed to work 25 hours every day. And rabbis like to pass around this old email about how the rabbi's supposed to be, good with the young, but there for every old person. That rabbis are supposed to relate to everybody all the time. And I know that there are places where rabbis, are the sense that we are human may not be near the top of the priority list of some places. But especially now, I'm grateful that the message I'm getting is, Rabbi, you need to take really good care of yourself, because there's so much that we look to you for. And I don't mean that in terms of hours. I mean that in terms of, let's make it quality time when we are together, so that I can also spend time with my family, and I can also spend time working out, just as Rabbi Posen does. You can't underestimate the importance of moving the body. And also, as astronaut Kelly said, get outside when you can, right? So being aware of my own human needs. One of the wonderful things Zoom allows me to do is, my sister, who lives in Orlando, teaches a yoga class, which is now on Zoom. I now see my sister every week and get my yoga. So all kinds of good things.
So that brings up two questions in my mind based on what you shared. Number one is, talk about how Zoom, which has become seems to be the tool we're all using, how has that changed your rabbinate and how you connect with people? And secondly, I want to go back to the well-being issue. You mentioned, Rabbi Stone, about Jewish Family and Child Service, and their efforts to really help our community and to be there. How are we helping people adjust to this time, providing mental health support? We get calls at the Federation. So, Zoom fatigue is real. Okay. At the same time, it's how we seem to communicate. So let's talk about Zoom, and then we'll talk about mental health support. So let's focus on that.
Oh, Zoom. Oh, Zoom. I mean, on the one hand, it makes it so much easier to attend so many meetings. On the other hand, I'm attending so many meetings I'm on the balcony, as Rabbi Stone just said, to be outside is sort of the balm for you. So I thought, okay, I'll take this outside on the balcony outside my bedroom where my children don't know it exists, which is why it's mostly quiet out here. But Zoom fatigue is real. And I think that the challenge, the more that we move into this, is to find the ways in which we can connect with one another outside of the screen and the box, right? Each of us right now is in this beautiful, tiny little box where you only see this amount and not the piles of laundry in other places or all of the other. Now, what's nice is I'm now a human, because congregants have seen my piles of laundry, because I haven't been able to hide them every time. But I think that there's real opportunities for creativity, especially in Portland as we move into summer, where there are opportunities to be in parks and outdoors and 6 feet of, between us. I'm blessed to work at Congregation Neve Shalom, who were incredible in a lot of ways, but we have a parking lot that is ours, and it is giant. And so we've never programmed around our parking lot before, but I imagine that we likely will, because it's an easy way to start bringing people together in that sense. So for that part of it, that's my answer.
Great.
I find Zoom to be such an interesting double-edged blessing, because on the one hand, there are no accessibility barriers. Our Torah study has grown to include people in other time zones and people who can't make it down the stairs of the building where we are now, unfortunately. So in that way, it's a blessing. Zoom has also been a very interesting, and Rabbi Posen, I owe you this email. It's been a very interesting challenge that I was telling Rabbi Posen about the other day, that for my congregation that takes very seriously the idea that we are part of a larger community that's guided by thousands of years of tradition that are really, quite grounding when you're trying to feel authentic and have integrity in these days, that for us, I felt very strongly that it's not enough to try to make it as if we are together when we are on Zoom. So davening is not like it was. And to Rabbi Posen's opening comment about how we are a people who knows how to adapt, we have an entire section of our liturgy which recalls that we used to bring sacrifices. So my congregation, those of us who are the regular daveners who are into this kind of geeky stuff, are really interested in trying to create some kind of blessing that will recognize that we are remembering when we could be together. And that's shocking and disturbing, but it's also true. So we are attempting to see the genius of our people in creating a placeholder for who we used to be and not forget that. And to keep reminding ourselves that we do have references, and we do have, we do know what this looks like. We've been here before. So for us, we are following the halachic insight about minyan. So for anybody who needs to be reviewed on this, and Rabbi Posen, this is the gist of what I'm going to send you. There are sources that talk about whether or not you can be part of a minyan if you are outside looking through a window at the people praying. And what is this if not a window? So it's pretty clear among modern halachic decisors that if there's a minyan and you zoom into it, you can be counted as the 11th person in that minyan. And you can say amen, and you can be included. But what you can't do is make the first 10. So a virtual minyan, from the point of view of a minyan itself, you got to be together. And you might say, why is that important? But I will say that when I was looking at these sources and trying to figure out what would make the most sense for my people and what felt authentic, I suddenly understood what critical mass means like never before. Have you ever been about to start a speech or a teaching and 3 people showed up when you were expecting 20? And did you feel your energy was different as a result, whether you were the person giving the speech or the person listening? There's something about having enough people. So for Jews, critical mass is what we mean by minyan. So there's an expression of being together in a room, which is different from being together in a Zoom room. And so for us, we've made that distinction in our practice. When it comes to davening, we are davening separately at the same time on Zoom so we can have each other's company, but we're davening the individual experience. And I'll send you the sources I was using.
I mean, I think I would just to add to that, because you brought up a couple of points that I have had swirling in my head, which is number one, our daily minyan at Neve has probably 3 times the number of regular attendees because no one has to go anywhere. Right. So you wake up and you can be right there. The second is this is a personal moment, but I know it inspired another kid. So this past Shabbat, Shiri was asked to lead. Shiri is my 6.5-year-old. And she was working with one of her dear friends at the congregation, and she felt that she was ready to lead Shema and Ve'ahavta, which she would never do in person. But on the Zoom minyan, she felt ready to do it. And so on Shabbat morning, she led Shema and Ve'ahavta as a surprise to our downstairs minyan service on Zoom. And she said to me, Mommy, I'm not ready to do it in person, but having the screen there made it she didn't say accessible, but she said it made it less scary to me.
Yep.
And she was in her room all by herself and muted and unmuted and did all those things because she was ready to do that.
We're having that same blessing for some families. One bar mitzvah, it's going to work out better for them because of that same kind of idea. The other thing I want to say about Zoom though, Mark, is just, I got the best tip that I have experienced from Congressman Blumenauer, who lives not that far from me. One day I happened to be outside and I saw him walking down the street on his phone, and he stopped to say hello. And he told me that every day he walks the neighborhoods of Portland and does all his meetings and conference calls on his phone while he's walking. And when he has to, he'll have some kind of FaceTime Zoom experience. But the balance of that is like so many other things in our lives. If I'm going to talk to one other person and it doesn't have to be face-to-face, I'm going to grab my phone and go for a walk for that 45 minutes. And that has a tremendous effect on the Zoom fatigue. So I offer Congressman Blumenauer's teaching to me, to all of us.
I appreciate that. You know, you talked about getting outside, and Rabbi Posen, I see you're sitting outside. Let's go back to the mental health challenge. You know, families being isolated, stuck inside. In some ways, we've kind of been blessed that it has not been a rainy spring, that it could very well have been, where it would have been much more difficult to go outside. But instead, the sun at least is shining most of the time. Just talk about what you're hearing from your congregants and the challenges that are out there in regard to the mental health aspects of this pandemic and the isolation and the lack of community that we might feel in person.
There's so many places to go with that. I go back when you started with the weather to how the first week when we were all practicing physical distancing, the week right after Purim when everyone went into this, and it was gorgeous outside and the sun was shining, and then we were all like, okay, we got this. The sun is out, we're gonna be okay. And then the next week it just poured for like 2 weeks straight. And I remember the feeling that we had, which was like, oh no. Like we thought we had this when the sun was out because we could go be outside. And then all of a sudden we had to turn to, wait, how much laundry do I want to wash every time you go jump in 700 puddles? And what is that going to be like? And what I'm finding is that I actually have more congregants who come out with asking for support, or more people who are feeling the weight of this every time we have a gray week. So last week was a really gray week. Today is the first full sun day that we've had in quite some time. And it does make a difference on people. So even getting outside is super important, but when it's gray, it's really hard to do that. And the other thing is that so many of our mental health care professionals are overwhelmed. And it's months of a wait list to get in to see somebody to help and support and talk. And while we do that as clergy, we're not necessarily the people who can do it for months on end and solve those problems. But I have been, as Rabbi Stone started in the beginning, our JFCS is super equipped right now. And it feels so good to be able to recommend that people connect with them and engage at least in these weeks right now until they're waiting until they can get into somebody who could be more permanent, to have somebody to send them to, and make sure that there are people available for them. But I'm super concerned about the effects of this isolation, and how do we feel safe again being near people? Can you be outside and go on a bike ride and not terrify yourself that just going on that bike ride is something that might expose you? And I think it's something that it requires a tremendous amount of bravery for ourselves at this point, because it doesn't matter where we're standing, we know that we're stepping into a place that is unknown, and strength to be in that space. And our job as clergy is to tell people that the choices you make for yourself, if they're healthy for yourself, are choices that you can make for yourself. And that the fear is not the fear of isolation. We should not fear other people in favor of isolation, but that we should really, 10 is a minion, we should strive to find safe ways to be in connection with each other.
because we need each other. One of the things we find most strongly as we look around our homes without our friends in them, without social opportunities, is we feel what's missing. We feel that we need to be a community, that this rugged individualism, which is such an American narrative, is just so not true, that we really do rely on each other. One of the things that I'm taking for granted is that everybody's stressed out by this, and that therefore part of what I want to do is think carefully about how to address it as proactively as possible, right? So what is my job right now? I am extremely Torah referential because Torah has never let me down. Torah is full of stories of fractious community having trouble. And I find it just hauntingly, creepily accurate and relevant that as we are stepping forward into a world that we have no sense of certainty about, so are our ancestors right now, right? We are, in the book of Numbers, we are about to, strike the tent and get moving. And the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to have trouble. We're going to be stressed out. We're going to fight with each other. We're going to be afraid. We're going to be full of doubt. It's going to be, it's a really interesting time of year. So for me, one of the things that I explore is through the study we do, can we shed light on how people are feeling? I find our studies, our Torah study, our Talmud study, every time we get together to study, it's, and this is not a patent, right? Every teacher of Torah knows this. What it does is it opens up a sense of, okay, well, human beings haven't changed that much in a couple thousand years. I think I can relate to this. And then it reflects back on, oh my God, those were real people. And it makes the rest of Torah feel a little bit more accessible at that point, which I find to be an ongoing, useful exercise for Jews. So the other thing I guess I would say is we've gone out of our way to create opportunities to be in touch. And that's not just calling people, although obviously the one-on-one call or email is important, but also we have found Minyan attendance to have become an opportunity to check in on each other. How you doing today? It's a really important part of all the ways that we gather at this point, the check-in, right? That is at the beginning of the agenda, not the end, not only for the Board of Rabbis, but for just about everything that we do, I think now. We can't do pastoral visits. And in some way, I think that's positive, because one of the other things I feel very strongly about as a rabbi is I am not a pastor or a priest. One of the things I want to do is make sure that everybody in my community feels equally knowledgeable and empowered within Jewish tradition to reach out to each other and help each other, because I'm going to need them to help me too sometime.
Thank you for that. So I want to get to some of the Q&A that people have come up. So I'm going to ask the Rabbi Posen, you asked me not to ask the obvious question, but I want you to just give the obvious, very simple answer that you shared with me earlier. What do you foresee for the high holidays and perhaps Zoom services or what have you?
It's on the OVR agenda for next week. We tried to talk about it at our last meeting, and all of us were too overwhelmed with Shavuot and everything else that we said, no, thank you. We just sort of all had a collective moment of silence and inability to move. We are talking about it. We are thinking about it. We are, as congregations, I can't speak for every congregation in Portland, but my understanding in the conversations I've had is that we're all having conversations about what's the best way to move forward. And we're checking in with each other. What are you doing? What are you using as your protocols to bring people back in? If you're bringing people back in, how are you managing this situation and that situation? What are you feeling is a safe space? I would anticipate, just if I had a crystal ball and I could look into it, that there will be more Zoom-based or physically distant-based high holiday experiences coming to the Portland community. And that's out of abundance of caution and wanting to keep people safe. and wanting to make sure that those who are in the highest risk categories don't feel that they are missing out on something by not being able to be physically present. And our job as humans is pikuach nefesh, saving lives. And so that's one way that we can do that moving forward. I know that every synagogue will make their own announcements when they're ready and as their plans come into being. But we are talking to each other as rabbis about it. And I have some crazy ideas about ways that we can all work together in terms of sharing the joy of the high holidays for the entire Portland Jewish community that's not just Zoom-based, but we're going to get there. And I would say probably we'll share whatever we come up with Mark for Mark's Remarks and the Jewish Review and all the other ways, your congregations, but all the other ways that we have of putting that information out to the community.
Thank you. I apologize. I keep putting myself on mute because my dog was barking, so I apologize if you hear that in the background. It was an interesting question about technology. And what role does online technology play in transforming our Jewish experience today? Rabbi, you talked about your sister who leads yoga in Orlando, Florida. You can have people are joining your minyan from different time zones. Talk a little bit about how this is transforming our Jewish life.
Well, to be absolutely candid, I feel like it's been, it is such an important way of fulfilling the mitzvah of pikuach nefesh. It is such an important way of helping people still come together even though we can't be together physically, that I feel like it's really, speaking only for myself as a rabbi who takes these things quite seriously, I really feel that for me, it has changed the parameters around what I'm comfortable Zooming, right? And that's a big deal for me. I'm not somebody who's ever Zoomed Shabbat. And I have enough people in my congregation who are similarly in recoil from using electronics on Shabbat that, even though we've been Zooming Talmud study for years. But we're a very diverse congregation. I might have Reform ordination, but I left the Reform movement a long time ago. And as an independent rabbi who takes halacha quite seriously, I will say that this pandemic and Zoom's ability to bring us together, despite our issues in terms of accessibility, has completely changed the game for me. That one of the main reasons I want to guard against Zoom fatigue is that I believe that it's going to be an important part of everything I do in terms of bringing my community together in meaningful ways for the foreseeable future. I mean, I'm now talking about doing a hybrid Shabbat service where we get 10 people together safely distanced over the summer in somebody's backyard, and it will Zoom everybody else. And I would never have said that last summer, not in a million years.
Understood. Rabbi Posen, you want to add anything?
I mean, I think I'm echoing the same kind of conversation, which is, we've had live streaming at Neve Shalom for over a year, and we had put in that infrastructure probably 18 months ago. That was simply a wide range view of the congregation, like wide screen, wide frame, so that family members my mom watched every Shabbos just so she could see me, and really she was looking for the kids. And then she would text me and tell me what she thought of what I wore and what I said. So It went from being, I know, she's my mama, but it went from being in that space to being like we had that in place so that we now were able to connect with people in different ways. And as a conservative congregation who's very mindful, like you, Rabbi Stone, of technology and Shabbat and what we're comfortable of, it was a really big conversation about, can we Zoom services so that people have to click to get into the room, versus using our live stream, which are fewer clicks and, that's always in place. And then fine, if we can lead services, but what about a minyan? You have to have a minyan to read Torah, and people miss hearing Torah. And we've been engaged in some really meaningful conversations about how do we go forward with B'nai Mitzvah? How do we read Torah? How do we hold that space? I think what'll be really interesting will be not how we're using it now, because I think we're every week using it to a different extent to create more community and build upon what we already had as the foundation. what'll be really interesting is when we're able to gather in larger groups. I don't know when that will be, but whenever that is, will we continue to use what we've learned from this for connection? So will Daily Minyan be in person and Zoom? Will Shabbat morning not just be the wide lens of the congregation, but actually zoom in on the clergy or the B'nai Mitzvah so that people aren't just seeing everything, but really having that more personal, which we've been able to do now in this space. And I'm curious to see how we use it moving forward and what that looks like. I don't know yet.
Yeah, no, look, it's certainly, look, the world is flat, and it makes the world even feel flatter these days that, you can get Jewish content from anywhere around the world, any time of day, at any moment. And it has its blessings. It also has its challenges. So we'll see how we manage through this. Somebody wanted to know, how do you approach the unfamiliar aspects of the current situation? Because people are coming to you for answers, and you may not have all the answers. So how do you approach that?
I focus on the questions and on the uncertainty and learning to live with it. If our ancestors could do it for 40 years in the wilderness, we're going to have to learn to do it. Now, when I see that people are getting frustrated and getting overwhelmed, I sometimes think that what we need is some more study and some more perspective. One of the things that has been important to me has been, for example, realizing all the ways in which this is not unfamiliar territory. Right? There was a pandemic 100 years ago. Right? This is not unfamiliar. The only way it's unfamiliar is it hasn't happened to us. Right? So let's get let's think a little bit about the larger perspective. One really, really great corrective to feeling too sorry for myself has been to read the writings of the Piasetzner Rebbe, the Rebbe of the Warsaw Ghetto, who taught Torah to those who still sought Torah study during the sufferings of the Warsaw Ghetto. And that brought people a great deal of, I can't say comfort or consolation, but sense of steadiness and structure, right? If your Torah teachings count, if your Jewish values count, they should count now more than ever. If they don't, time to get some new ones, right? Time to dig deeper. Whatever it is that we thought was important, this is a wonderful time. And for many of us, we are safe and we have some leisure. And rather than be anxious about the future, we actually have the gift of some time to think about the present. And I'm not saying it's comfortable, but what a gift. The unexamined life is not worth living is not a Jewish statement, but it's one that I subscribe to anyway.
I think anyone who knows me knows that I despise the unknown, that it is not my comfort zone. I mean, I'm like a lot of people, but like I am a planner and I like to know everything that's going to happen from point A to point B to point Z. I like to plan it out and understand every part of everything. So like if they call, hey, there's a snow day coming, I get so angry. And then I'm like, because, I spoke about how amazing our parking lot is before. The reason Neve closes for extra time is because it's also a microclimate. And so when it snows, it takes like extra days to open the building because of the ice there. So when they announced that the pandemic was coming and we were going to have to close, I was oddly calm because we can't control it. Like a snow day, I can talk about how I grew up in Michigan, so I don't understand why you don't have a snowplow and salt. I mean, I get the salmon. I understand. They're very important, and we love the wildlife. But, like, the city should not shut down for 7 days because of snow. That's infuriating to me. This is something that we can't control. And I've been working on leaning into that space. And the understanding that wherever we are and however we're approaching this is not something that we've done before, but something that people have done before and they have come back from it. And so I think that keeping that perspective of I can't stand the unknown and it makes me like lose my mind all the time and I lose a lot of sleep about it. And 1918 happened and yet here we are and everyone's, communities still exist. People came back from that. Things have happened in my personal life and in other people's lives that we thought this is life ending and life changing, and yet we still are resilient and we come back. And it's the constant reframing of this isn't an end. This is an opportunity to really own where we are and to reframe ourselves. And, you know, the Torah, they didn't know what was going to happen. They were in the desert. They had no clue where they were going to end up, and yet they did, and we can do it too.
Fair enough. Well, we'll get through this. I mean, that's the goal. So as we get on the path to hopefully find a vaccine, or, you know, really flattening the curve and moving forward and everything is opening up, et cetera, how hard will it be to get people to come back to doing what we used to always do? So, you know, Rabbi Posen, you mentioned about Minyan and how Minyan is, you know, doubled or tripled in size. Well, if we go back and Minyan goes back to 11 people, you know, what was the miss? So how do we get people to feel comfortable, safe, and secure, and to say, if you did it then, you can do it now?
I don't think there's any going back. I think what we're learning now is that things are going to change. This is one of those systemic moments. It does give us the opportunity to really look at what works and what doesn't. You know, my staff is saying, why are we coming to work every day when we're working just as well from home? Why have I created this home environment that's so comfortable and then all I do is leave it, right? So, you know, what's going to happen if we don't come to work every day? You know, maybe that pattern is last century. You know, maybe there's another way to do this. Maybe there's a way to be more outside, at least in the summertime. I think saying, how do we reopen, right, has been really the wrong way of understanding what's happened to religious organizations, because we haven't been closed. And in the same way, how do we go back to normal? That's the wrong question, right? So there's this marvelous famous phrase about a Nobel Prize winner who was Jewish, who, when he was asked, how did you become such an important scientist? He said, every day when I came home, my mom didn't say, what did you learn? She said, Izzy, did you ask a good question? This is a time for really asking questions, for exploring what are the right questions, because the way you ask a question already assumes parameters, right? And if you can't ask a good question, you're going to miss important data, right? I mean, I think that that's a pretty simple scientific statement, but it's amazing how in our assumptions, we ask things that aren't questions, really, because people already know the answer, or we ask a question in a way that it can't be answered. This is a time for questions. This is a time for not settling for whatever worked before and not that well. So right now, when everything's up in the air, what can we do about the landing pieces that might make them healthier for the planet, for our community, for the way we work together as a community? I think that High Holy Days is going to be a tremendously creative opportunity. Yes, I didn't want to think about it before Shavuot either, but I gave in yesterday and started having these dreams about these really cool things that wouldn't have been possible last year because people would have said, oh no, this is how we do it.
I mean, I think that the creativity is the point that I sit myself on in this space, because the Judaism that we experience today is called Rabbinic Judaism for a reason. It was created in response to the end of temple or biblical Judaism, right? Like the temple was destroyed and the rabbis had to adapt and figure out a new way to live a Jewish life without that building that was their number one place to go to. And the way that they had structured everything was sacrifice and temple and coming together and physical space. And then all of a sudden that physical space wasn't there and they weren't rebuilding it. And there was a diaspora and they had to understand, okay, prayer instead of sacrifice, this instead of that. And they were able to start to get creative and understand what worked in the world that they were living in as opposed to the world that was. And I don't want to say that we, the rabbis now are rabbinic, like we're not the Sanhedrin. We don't live in that era of brilliant thought in that sense, because a lot of what they did was give us the freedom to be able to do what we do now. I mean, I'm not Yehuda Hanasi, 1,000% not there, who created the Mishnah. And I think that's the model of Judaism and Jewish living, is being able to innovate and create in the space that we're in. And as we think about how do we come back together, I think about my kids who every day when they say, why can't we go to the playground? And then they answer their own question, because of coronavirus. I think about how am I going to teach them that they say coronavirus, because Matan is 3.5 and that's how he says it, right? It's super cute. If you ever want to hear how this is a cute experience, listen to children tell you what's happening. But how am I going to convince them to go do the monkey bars after 7 months when I've been don't go to the playground, it's closed, we can't go there right now? It's about reintroducing step by step and slowly that these are safe experiences. And these are the ways that we've got you. And just as a parent for a child is always saying, you're safe because I won't do anything that is unsafe for you, as religious institutions, that's the same message we're sending to our congregants. We're doing and schools, it's not just us, but we're doing our best to keep you as safe as we possibly can. We're not going to run programs that we think are high risk, gonna get rid. I mean, if you look at some of different religions who were let's get back together in 100, we're not doing that. Judaism is really, the Jewish institutions I'm looking at are not doing that, because we hold pikuach nefesh, saving a life, at such a high priority. And so the work that we're going to do to rebuild and come back together is going to be really purposeful, I think, and probably really creative, and hold within it the idea that community is essential, and the way that we build it is by holding each of us at the truth that we hold for ourselves and how we can manifest that in community. So that might be I used to host a Fourth Friday potluck dinner for 30, 40, 70 people in my home. And I'm thinking my home is not big enough for that many people, and I desperately miss getting together with others. So we might have to move the location. Can a potluck even happen, right? We're thinking about that, to think about what's the safest way to bring people back together, but at the core is bring people physically back together. And I think that we're going to get there. It's just going to take a lot of tiny, tiny baby steps, and a lot of thought and a lot of trust that when we feel unsafe, we're going to feel comfortable saying that's not for me, and I'm glad that that is for you. And walking that tightrope of how we come back together.
Thank you. So let's end on a high note. Let's go one last question, and then I'll do a little commercial at the end. The current situation, it's awful, but there's also unexpected blessings. Time with family, which has its challenges, but being together, the help, the care, and concern about others. Talk about what you're getting out on the positive side of what we're experiencing.
I mean, so Daily Minion having 30 plus people, 40 people, right? That's a positive. People are feeling held in that sense. My children who constantly say, Mommy, why are you home and not playing with us, now understand that when they went to school, I wasn't just sitting at home contemplating my navel, right? I had a job, and now they're seeing that I'm doing that as they bounce in and out of
Right.
Zoom calls. And I think that for a lot of parents, we may not be seeing it as a positive right now. What we are showing to people is that look at our lives, look at for our children to see us as strong humans who are doing work, for congregants as in the rabbi realm, to see that yes, every time I'm with you, that's a moment we're not in this other place. That's actually very positive for work-life balance moving forward. And I think that there's a bigger awareness about that in the global scheme of how our society has been set up to not benefit the entire family, but on this very old model, and now is the time for change. I would also say that I have never been more acutely aware as a human being of me and what I need. And I'm hearing that from a lot of other people as well, that we're starting to put into question, what do I actually need in order to exist? Is it outdoor time? Is it me time? Is it going to bed at 10 o'clock? Is it less screen time? And right now it's very it feels scary and overwhelming to be in this space with, I have to be on the screen all the time where there's so much to get done and I don't have any control. But I think that learning about ourselves in this moment can help us to move forward as a healthier society. And I think that's a giant benefit. And I'm always one for amazing moments of creativity. And I am loving seeing all of the creativity that's coming out right now in terms of how we connect community, how we build programming. You know, you get this in Judaism. I've never experienced this more than in a synagogue, which is, well, we've always done it that way. Guess what? We can't do it that way right now. So we're going to try something new. And it's super hard. And it's a really brilliant moment to change and move forward that we couldn't have had without this. There's no way we could change things if we didn't have this moment of, well, we can't. So what do we do next? And I think those are some of the positives that I look at.
Rabbi?
I am struck by just how much stress there is right now, how much fear, how much anger, how much acting out, how much hatred is being acted out, how much violence, and really how terrifying it is out there. And some of the terrible things that people are doing to each other. And some of the terrible ways our society is being manipulated to foment division and hatred. And I feel as if in the middle of all this, the pandemic comes to enforce not a complete timeout, but to enforce a little more space. And so I take it as a blessing to be able to eke out this little bit of time where I'm not commuting, I'm not doing whatever it was used to take up the time that I can now have another meeting in, and there are ways, by the way, that those of us who need to be busy can be just as busy now. But right now it's sort of in our faces, and I think it's a difficult blessing, but the blessing of being confronted with, if you can't go shopping and you can't go out to dinner and you have to sit still a little bit, who are you? What does your life mean? What can you learn about yourself, and what is the universe trying to tell you? That's, to my mind, a blessing if we grasp it and make it so.
Amen.
Somebody froze.
Amen. I don't know if I froze or not, but
You did,
hopefully you can hear me. I want to thank both of you, Rabbi Posen.
Oh.
Sorry, I'm back.
If we want to talk about the Zoom challenges, this is one of them.
No, I don't think Mark is back. This is Caron from the Jewish Federation. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
So on behalf of Mark and the rest of our Federation's team, Rabbi Stone and Posen, we want to thank both of you very much for joining us today. Your insight was enlightening and heartening, especially as we go into the holiday of Shavuot. And I encourage people to check out the OBR opportunity to study all together. I think that's a really wonderful thing you all said. Even though we're apart, we're not alone. And so it's a wonderful opportunity for us to come together in study and celebration. And who doesn't love cheesecake and dairy? I know that I've already made my first test cheesecake and looking forward to the next one. And just to remind our listeners on this call, that we will have another webinar next Wednesday. These are our weekly Wednesdays, and I believe that we're going to be hearing from someone from the Oregon Health Authority. As I just saw while we were on this call, the Multnomah County is going to be putting in their application, and Washington County's is in process. So those of us who live in this most populous part of Oregon will have to start thinking about how we prepare ourselves, as we talked about on this call, to get back into the thick of it, slowly and deliberately and thoughtfully. And so we will have more information for you. Our email will go out tomorrow to let people know how to register for that. So Chag Shavuot Sameach, and thank you again. And that concludes our call this afternoon, everyone. Thank you.